Hi, I'm Amy and I'm at home and today's bread day. I'm so excited to bake bread with you. It all starts with sourdough starter. I know a lot of you don't have it, but I'm going to tell you all about mine, and if you want to try and make it, I will help you every step of the way. But we're going to bake bread. So this is what my starter looks like. This is ready to go to be made into bread. It is bubbly and smells really good, really fermented and yeasty. Here's a little trick to know that your sourdough starter is ready to be made into bread dough. Just put a little bit in water. Look at that. And it floats. If it doesn't float, then it doesn't have the necessary aeration and air bubbles, and you need to keep feeding it and making it healthy. So I'm just putting it right back in, and I'm going to show you how to make some bread now. Come over here, Katie, my videographer, come on over. I'm going to show you how to use a digital scale. So this is something that I love so much, and it's really important when making bread because the measurement is much more accurate. This is how it works. The bowl that I'm using is 295 grams. So I'm going to hit the 0 button, and it sort of takes away all that weight so that I can measure my other ingredients. And I'm going to start with my starter. I'm putting in 180 grams of starter. And as I said, this is the best way to be super accurate. Really close. A little bit too much. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it sure is nice. I'm going to keep it at 179. And I'm going to feed my starter in a sec too. Because when you take away starter to bake bread, you want to add some flour and water in equal parts back. But for now, we're going to make bread. The next step is to add water. So I'm going to hit my 0 button again, and it makes everything kind of like, you know, like it weighs nothing. And I'm going to add 300 grams of water. Okay, getting close. Really close. Perfect, 301 grams, no problem. And I'm going to stir this up because it doesn't have to be perfectly stirred, but I want to sort of disperse the starter into the water. It'll absorb the flour in a more even way.
Stuart says hi. I think she's making her bread tomorrow with her starter.
Oh, Stuart, I'm so excited for you. Let me know. Let me know how it goes. And of course, you know I'm here for you.
She's wondering who the better camera person is.
That's not a fair question. I love everyone equally behind the camera. Okay, so I'm going to add my flour now. This is bread flour. And I'm putting in 400 grams. And I'm going to publish this recipe with this video, so not to worry. You're just watching today. You're watching and learning. So I'm adding in 400 grams, and I know it's really hard to find bread flour right now. This is actually my last little bit of bread flour, and then I'm going to have to move to all-purpose flour, which I'm not really looking forward to because I find that bread flour yields a much better loaf. So I have here 400 grams of bread flour, and then I add 25 grams of a different kind of flour. Like I feel like that is what makes my bread unique to me. I'm going to add a little bit of buckwheat flour, 25 grams. I set my 0 button, so it's just measuring 25 grams. And what I love about buckwheat flour, it is, first of all, it's a really earthy, flavored, intense flour. I have it because I like to make French galettes. And so that's everything I need for my bread dough. Katie, why don't you go back here and I can show what this process looks like when I'm getting it from a whole bunch of ingredients into the actual dough, because this is actually a really easy part of making bread, but it takes time. I mean, it takes time, a little tiny bit of effort, but it's really cool to see how the bread goes from like this shaggy mass.
See it.
Like you can see, it's like super shaggy. And I'm gonna turn this out onto my clean work surface.
We've got some questions about people who have been to 5 different stores, can't find bread flour, and what does regular flour do differently?
Well, regular flour is called all-purpose flour. There are 3 different kinds of flour, basically, for baking, for our purposes as home cooks. There is all-purpose flour, which really works for any kind of baking. That's why it's called all-purpose. And then there's bread flour, which has a higher degree of gluten, and it's really good for bread baking. And then there's something called pastry flour, which is the opposite of bread flour, and that's really good for like pastry baking. It makes for a tender crumb, which I think is such a funny word, but it makes cakes like really tender, as opposed to bread flour, which makes bread like really kind of structured and firm with like a good crust on the outside.
So what about for our friends who are going to have to use all-purpose flour?
All-purpose flour is fine for bread baking. It's, you know, it's absolutely fine. The bread flour gives bread a little bit more structure and I think a little bit more flavor, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with using all-purpose flour at all. It's kind of the difference between like using like a homegrown tomato or like an artisan tomato versus one that one that was sort of grown in a hothouse that's a little bit more everyday.
Walk us through what you're doing right now. What is this?
So
why is it so sticky?
So it is super sticky. What I'm doing is called stretching and folding. And if you noticed, when I first dumped this dough out of my bowl, it was so shaggy and it wasn't coming together. And by doing this, I'm slowly mixing the dough together and it actually turns into dough. And yes, it is super, super sticky, but it will not be so sticky after a while because I'm gonna do this. I usually do this like until I can't do it anymore, until the gluten develops enough.
If you had to put a number on how many times you're doing it, what would you say?
I would say, I always say 10, like do it 10 times, but see, I'm getting some of the sticky off my hands. Do it like 10 times. It could be, I think I've done it more than 10 times right now, mostly because I'm talking. You can't do it too much. This is like the most important thing you can do to your bread is to develop this gluten. And that is mixing together by hand the flour, the water, and the starter.
So that's the stretch.
This is the stretch, yep.
And that's the fold.
And I get right underneath. And by getting underneath the dough, I'm making sure nothing sticks to my surface. I don't like to add extra flour when I do this, which is logically something that would keep everything from sticking from my hands to my surface, because I feel like that takes the balance of the actual dough kind of off center a little bit. You don't want to add extra ingredients. So I just keep doing this, and you know, the longer you practice, the better you get. So I'm pretty happy with this. I have sticky hands. One thing I've noticed since I started to talk about bread while we're all quarantined is a lot of people that I'm helping make bread, and thank you so much for working with me. A lot of people call me in a panic when they're making their bread because they're like, my bread dough is too sticky, it has too much water in it, it's not gonna work, and there's panic. I can feel the panic coming through in the text. And it's really fine. It's fine to have sticky dough. That's what baking bread is all about, and it's completely normal. So I'm gonna let this rest about 15 minutes and then I add salt. I don't like to add salt in the very beginning, but what I usually do so I don't forget is I just sprinkle salt on top like that. And I love gray salt for baking. So I just sprinkle my salt on top. I don't really measure it, but I just let that sit and rest, and then I'll come back to it. And then what I'll do for the next 2 hours is come back to my dough and stretch and fold it like every 30 minutes. And I want to show you what that looks like because it's very, very different. Let me move this over here. So I made this dough 2 hours ago. And look at it. It is airy.
It's not shaggy.
Not shaggy at all. So this is the dough I just made, and this is the dough I made 2 hours ago. And I will show you what it looks like to stretch and fold it. First of all, you can see it's not sticking to my surface at all.
And there's no flour under it either.
No flour at all. So I still do stretch and fold. And what I like to do is kind of take all 4 corners and pull them up like that, and then flip it over. This is ready for the next step. So the next step is putting it in a proofing basket. And if you don't have a proofing basket, it's absolutely fine. You can order them on Amazon, and you can order them on Food 52. They're easy to find even now, but you can use a bowl. But what I did was I took this dough, I made this dough yesterday. It looked like this, and I put it in my proofing basket, covered it with a towel, and put it in the refrigerator. And this is called a cold fermentation. And what this does, it helps to continue to develop all of the gluten in this bread that's going to make it bake up and be beautiful. And what I love about these proofing baskets is it makes lines like this, because I lined my basket with a little bit of flour, and then it makes a really beautiful, beautiful mark. So I'm going to show you what...
How long does it need a cold ferment for?
Like about 8 hours. And you don't have to do a cold ferment. I mean, I could bake this bread probably now. It would be ready for baking, but it would be almost like a white bread, you know, very sort of like very fluffy and not a lot of flavor. This is going to have a lot of flavor, and like you'll taste that sourdough. So Katie, come over here and I'm going to show what I do to bake. So I have my oven preheated to 500 degrees. And I have, this is my covered baking dish. And this is really, really hot. So it's important to be careful with this. So I have my dough, and every baker has a signature. This is called a lam. And I like to make a heart with mine. And the reason why it's so important to do this is because when the bread is baking, it makes a lot of steam because there's liquid inside. And what I like to do is a heart. And then I sprinkle some flaky sea salt in the middle.
Amazing.
And it's a beautiful presentation and something that is just unique to me. And
I think we've got like 2 minutes left, but that's beautiful.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so I'm going to get this in. Thanks for giving me a 2-minute warning. I did a really bad job with that.
It's
sizzling.
It
doesn't matter. One more thing I want to say about baking bread, which is a big subject. A lot of people are asking me this. I'm putting this in the oven, by the way, and I'm going to set my timer for 22 minutes. A lot of people ask me about bread sticking as it's baking. Come on. And there are 2 things you can do. First of all, heating your skillet or heating your lidded heating your baking dish will keep everything from sticking because it's hot. But you can also line it with parchment paper, and that'll help too. So here's my bread that I made this morning when I woke up. And anybody that follows me on Instagram knows that a lot of times I post my bread after I baked it because I'm so proud of what it looks like. I'm going to cut this in half and show you what the middle is. And I hope it looks okay. Yes, it looks beautiful. So that's my bread. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll bake bread. Ask me as many questions as you want. I'm just a DM away. Have a great day. Bye-bye.